The execution of Kevin Johnson, one 9-year-old's final walk. Hello, friends. Tonight we step into the final 24 hours of a man whose story still divides opinions across Missouri. To some, Kevin Johnson Jr. was a ruthless criminal who took the life of a police officer in cold blood. To others, he was a grieving brother, a young man pushed over the edge by the sudden loss of the sibling he loved most. On November 29, 2022, the state carried out his execution, bringing an end to a case that had been debated for nearly 2 decades. But what really happened in those last hours before the needle touched his arm? What did he eat? What were his final words? And how did he face the weight of justice closing in? Stay with me, because this is one of the most emotional stories we've covered. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful prison documentary stories. Dear friends, the morning of November 29, 2022, was not like any other inside the walls of Missouri's Eastern Reception, Diagnostic, and Correctional Center. For Kevin Johnson, it was the last sunrise he would ever see. At 37 years old, he had already spent nearly half his life on death row. The clock had run out. Kevin awoke early, long before the first rays of daylight cut across the prison yard. His cell on Deathwatch was quiet, but filled with the unshakable weight of what lay ahead. Guards passed by with heavy boots, the echo of metal doors opening and closing carrying a finality that pressed on his chest. He knew those sounds well. He had heard them each time another man was led away for execution. Today, those same sounds marked his turn. Kevin sat on his bed, staring at the wall. In his hand was a folded letter, written the night before to his daughter, Corionsa, whom he lovingly called Corey. She was 19 years old now, just on the edge of adulthood, but still barred from witnessing the state execute her father. Missouri law required witnesses to be at least 21. Kevin had begged for an exception, but the courts refused. That denial hurt him more deeply than any punishment the state could inflict. His only child, the person he had fought to live for, would not be allowed to say goodbye. His last meal was delivered around mid-morning. Unlike many others who asked for elaborate dinners, steaks, fried chicken, pies, Kevin declined. He requested the standard prison tray: scrambled eggs, cereal, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and milk. It wasn't much, but to him, it was enough. Kevin had told friends and supporters that he didn't want to give the state the satisfaction of treating his final hours as a spectacle. He would leave quietly, without a special request. As the hours ticked by, Kevin's mind returned again and again to July 5, 2005, the day that changed everything. That morning, police officers arrived at his family's home in Kirkwood to serve a warrant for a minor probation violation. Kevin wasn't even inside the house. He was across the street, watching, but chaos soon broke out. His younger half-brother, 12-year-old Joseph Bam Bam Long, collapsed on the porch, struggling to breathe. Kevin watched in horror as his brother's body went stiff, his chest heaving desperately. Their mother tried to rush to his side, but Sergeant William McEntee, one of the officers on scene, blocked her, citing safety procedures. Minutes passed, precious minutes. By the time an ambulance was finally called, it was too late. Bam Bam was gone. Kevin never forgave what he saw that day. To him, it wasn't just negligence, it was cruelty. He believed the officers, and especially Sergeant McEntee, had treated his brother's life as disposable. That grief and anger boiled inside him for hours, until that evening he snapped. When Sergeant McEntee returned to the neighborhood later that day for a routine call, Kevin confronted him. The words were few: "You killed my brother," before Kevin pulled the trigger of a stolen 9mm handgun. 5 shots pierced the patrol car. McEntee, gravely wounded, tried to drive away but crashed into a tree. Kevin walked up to the officer, who was now on the ground, bleeding, gasping for air. Without hesitation, Kevin fired 2 more shots, one into McEntee's back and another into his head. The 43-year-old sergeant, a husband, a father of 3, and a 20-year veteran, was gone. In his hand was a folded letter, written the night before to his daughter, Corionsa, whom he lovingly called Corey. She was 19 years old now, just on the edge of adulthood, but still barred from witnessing the state execute her father. Missouri law required witnesses to be at least 21. Kevin had begged for an exception, but the courts refused. That denial hurt him more deeply than any punishment the state could inflict. That's exactly what happened. Kevin was sentenced to death. From that moment, his case became one of the most controversial in Missouri history. Civil rights groups argued racial bias had influenced the outcome. Special Prosecutor E. Keenan later filed a motion pointing out how the lead prosecutor, Bob McCulloch, disproportionately sought the death penalty against black defendants, particularly in cases involving police officers. Kevin Johnson's case, they argued, was a textbook example. For the next 17 years, Kevin lived in the shadow of the gurney. His daughter grew up visiting him behind glass. Supporters rallied outside the prison gates year after year, filing appeals and petitions for clemency. But the courts and the governor remained unmoved. By late afternoon on November 29, 2022, the execution chamber was prepared. Outside, hundreds of protesters gathered in the cold, holding signs and candles, chanting prayers for mercy. Inside, Kevin sat in his Deathwatch cell, awaiting the inevitable. At 5:30 in the evening, guards escorted him to the chamber. He walked slowly but without resistance, flanked by officers on either side. When he entered the sterile, brightly lit room, he was strapped to the gurney. His arms were secured, intravenous lines placed. On the other side of the glass sat witnesses, among them members of Sergeant McEntee's family. When asked if he had final words, Kevin's voice was steady. "I am sorry for what I did," he said. "I am not the same person that I was. I love my daughter. I love my family. I love my supporters. Thank you for fighting for me. God is good." At 7 o'clock in the evening, the chemicals began to flow. Kevin closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. Within minutes, his chest rose one final time. At 7:40 in the evening, he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison, the crowd fell into silence. Some wept, some prayed, others simply stood still. Among them was Kevin's daughter, Corey, who wasn't allowed to witness her father's last moment. She clutched the final letter he had written to her, a letter urging her to live, to be strong, and to keep telling the truth about what happened. Kevin Johnson Jr.'s story remains one of deep contradiction. To some, he was a ruthless killer who ambushed a police officer. To others, he was a grieving brother pushed beyond his breaking point. But above all, his case forced America to confront the question: when justice and vengeance look so alike, how do we tell them apart? Kevin Johnson Jr.'s story does not leave us with easy answers. On one side stands the undeniable truth that a police officer, a father and husband, was gunned down in the line of duty. On the other side lies the reality of a young man broken by grief, poverty, and a system that too often failed him long before a trigger was ever pulled. His execution in 2022 closed the chapter legally, but morally, the questions remain. Was this justice or vengeance carried out in the name of order? What we do know is that Kevin's final words were not of anger but of love for his daughter, his family, and his supporters. Perhaps that is the part worth remembering. Friends, thank you for staying with me through this story. If you found meaning in it, subscribe and join us as we continue uncovering the human truth behind prison gates.